Rama 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 Ti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tatulyam Ramanama Varanani. We delight in the beautiful name of Sri Ram again and again. We even once remembered the name of Sri Ram bestows the fruit equal to the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. So once more we pick up the story of Rama, the Ramayana, and of course, because we are doing this a little intermittently, sometimes it is difficult to pick up where we left off. So I'll remind you how Sita is snatched by Ravana, the demon, taken to Sri Lanka on a flying chariot with all the human vices and virtues as well mixed up. And it is the same in all humanity. Virtues and vices are all mixed up because of our ignorance. And somehow one is allowed to dominate. And the correction, of course, is to bring in virtues. And Rama is the embodiment of virtue. But Rama is also extremely human. And in Rama's humanity, we see his tremendous grief when his beloved Sita is taken from him. And of course, who is normally seen to be a little tempestuous, who acts as a steadying force, if you like, or the steadying element, where Rama is absolutely distraught. And we can know that in our own grief, we are just temporarily out of balance. But the main thing is how to restore that. So I often give the example to runners that are running, let's say, 100 meters. And one is trained and one is not, and both end the race completely exhausted and breathless. The one who hasn't trained collapses and it gets taken to hospital. But the one that is trained recovers after about 5-10 minutes. So we came across various adventures in looking for Sita. You can imagine a hopeless situation. The initial conclusion is she's been taken by the demons and eaten. Obviously, cannibalism was rife in those early days. And so eventually they have come across what some might interpret as hill tribes. Now, the very interesting thing about monkeys is the monkey mind is a term that is often used in Hinduism and Buddhism to delineate the disturbed mind. The story, of course, goes a monkey is restless by its own nature, and the mind is also like that. But then when you add various extreme elements that compound this, such as you make the monkey drunk, you put wine there, the wine of desire. If the analogy is that the mind is like a monkey, you can imagine the monkey restless by its own nature and reeling. And then it gets stung by a scorpion, and it's hopping and it's reeling and it's restless by its own nature. And the scorpion of jealousy, and then the ghost, and pride and jealousy and desire, they all come in. And we can imagine the condition of a restless monkey like this. But you see, Hanuman comes onto the scene now. And Hanuman is immediately announced as the son of Vayu, son of the wind. So that means that the mind is present everywhere. We have to understand to our advantage, and I gave an understanding of this by giving a passage of the Katha Upanishad, that really there's only one mind. There's a gradation, if you will, going back, and we come to one conclusion. There's only one mind, cosmic mind, God's mind, a personal God. And this is like the wind. This is present everywhere. It's omnipresence, it's omniscient. And so Hanuman's purity and dedication and devotion ultimately to Rama, as a devotee, as an embodiment, if you will, of the Seva ideal. The Lord is my master, and I will serve him. This makes Hanuman, if Hanuman is like a monkey and is like the mind, Hanuman is steady, full of concentration, and therefore extremely powerful. So we pick up the story. You remember that Vali, the monkey king, had gotten trapped and he never came out. The monster came, and unfortunately Sugriva, his brother, assumed he was dead. And when he went back to the kingdom, he was unfortunately hailed as the new king, and he took it on. And of course, when Vali did come out, he wasn't dead at all. He became furious. And now Sugriva is a refugee. And he comes across, well, Hanuman comes across the Rama and Lakshmana. And we are introduced to Sugriva. And the comparison, the parallel is with Bharata, who also is acclaimed to take a kingdom, but decides to take it only as a regent. But Sugriva is weaker than this. So the story is explained, and the scene is Kishkinda, and we can pick the story up from here. Just to remind you, I'll go over the story again, that there was a Rakshasa, a great demon named Mayavavi. Mayava came to midnight to the gate of Kishkinda, with the kingdom there, and challenged Vali to instant combat. And in pursuance of the ancient ideal and ancient feuds and laws, you have to take up the combat. Somebody challenges you, you have to respond. And so Vali, in an instant, he engages in combat and rushed forth impetuously. Of course, you can refuse to fight, but you can see the impetuous nature of Vali coming out. And anyway, he is followed by his brother Sugriva. And seeing them, the Rakshasa runs away. And the two brothers pursue him. And they see him disappear into a great cave. And the cave of the mouth is overgrown with brushwood. And Vali, he bids Sugriva, exacting an oath from him, to wait at the entrance for him. You wait, I'll deal with this. And plunged himself into the darkness of the cave, and where the enemy was. Anyway, Sugriva, of course, waited patiently, and he waited a long, long time, but Vali never came out. And so he was racked with doubt what has happened. He was fretting, and he heard indistinct groans and shouts even, and they seemed, to his horror-struck ears, that they came from his brother. They were coming from the cave. Presently, they gushed out of the cave, foaming blood, and he was then sure that Vali had perished in the struggle. And just to make sure that the victorious Rakshasa wouldn't rush out in triumph from the cave and then destroy the whole kingdom of Kishkinda, Sugriva then blocks the entrance of the cave with a huge rock, and then goes back to Kishkinda and tells everybody of Vali's death. And as a rulerless state, you can't have one, you have to have a ruler. Then he was persuaded by all his ministers and so on, and elders, you occupy the vacant throne now, we have to have a king. And so, while he is enjoying the sweet fruits of power, like a bolt out of the blue, Vali appears. He bursts in on them. Of course, he's haggard, with wounds and not in a great state, but he is full of wrath and immediately accuses his brother of treason. and unnatural conduct towards someone who was once his brother and also was his king, both. And so Vali drives Sugriva out with great scorn as a wretch too vile to live. But he actually swore, not only that, he swore that he would slay him, only because he was unfortunately also his brother. He refrained. And so by a cruel fate, he'd been deprived of his home, that is Sugriva, and his throne, and everything, including even his wife, and had taken asylum, had sought asylum in the forest. Now there's a parallel between him and Rama, but with variations. So he took a few faithful friends, including the faithful Hanuman, and here at least he was safe in the forest, because Vali had been forbidden by a certain rishi or sage from entering the precincts where Sugriva was, on pain of death, on pain of instant death even. But the incident between Vali and Sugriva, we'll find it's a good example of the moral teaching conveyed in the Puranas and also the Itihasas that we are reading. There was nothing terribly wrong in the conduct either of Vali really of Sugriva or Sugriva theoretically, but see the emotions. One is weak, and anger, of course, confuses the mind. So a person who yields to anger loses the capacity to see the truth. Had he sat down, had Vali sat down with Sugriva, had Sugriva had the time to explain, things would have been sorted out. And so that way lies destruction when anger rules. And Vali's anger really led to his end in the first place. And Sugriva humbly confessed the truth when he did manage to get an opportunity. But you see, Vali wouldn't listen. And Vali was beside himself with rage, not listening to anything. And Sugriva too was guilty of imprudent haste. Instead of verifying, instead of going into the cave, which he could have done, he made some assumptions. What we call verbal delusion in the yogic language. And he concluded too quickly that his brother had died. We all jump to conclusions and make wrong judgments. But you see, the intellect is that instrument that we have that has the capacity to step back and weigh things up properly and make good decisions and not be overcome by the mind. The mind is overcome by the intellect. And this is an important lesson. How do we control the mind? How do we control the monkey mind? We control it by weighing things up and making correct judgments and decisions from the point of view of the intellect. So the Ashura, he was afraid, of course, that the Ashura was victorious, would come out and kill him, and so on and so forth. And so fear is another factor as well. And at first he wasn't keen on becoming king, that's true. And yet he was so weak-minded that he allowed himself to be persuaded by the people. Anyway, he yielded also to the subconscious desire without sufficient thought. So there's an element of a desire for power and enjoyment as well. Anyway, that's the background to all the difficulties that have come to Sugriva. Thoughtless action leads to unhappiness. And I think that's what we learn from the story of Sugriva. So we shouldn't desire what belongs to somebody else. We should exercise great care and control over these desires. And in contrast to Sugriva, when the ministers and subjects in Ayodhya pressed Bharata to accept the crown, well, Bharata was firm in his refusal. Bharata's strength of character was great. But Sugriva was a little weak. He was different. And as a result of his weakness, he suffered consequences. And Bharata had the courage to refuse. And because of that, his name lives on forever. Now we can see as a background that in every episode of this Ramayana, some lesson can be learned in daily life, for daily life. And the meaning is in some places is plain, and in others it's a little obscure, a little subtle, a little hidden. And if we read these stories with great reverence and think deeply, we can always see the moral of the story. So Sugriva concludes his story that he tells to Rama with a piteous appeal. Don't forget, Hanuman has taken him there. For fear of Vali, he says, I am a wanderer. And Rama is also a wanderer, and Lakshmana is also, they were all wanderers, but you can see the contrast. Rama is doing it out of duty, out of dharma. Sugriva is doing it out of fear. Will you, he appeals to Rama, will you kill Vali and restore to me my kingdom and my wife? This is his own brother he's talking about. Anyway, what is right is right. How can you have a king that rules a kingdom, a king with an impetuous nature that brings disaster on the kingdom? Somebody of more balanced mind has to take over and make sure that the kingdom is well. So Rama considers it, and he answers that he will. Certainly he says, I will. Vali cannot escape this. Be assured. Don't forget, Vali has taken everything, including Sugriva's wife. Anyway, as Sugriva and Rama were talking in this way in the Ashoka Grove, far away, the left eyelids of Sita throbbed. Now that seemed to be a good omen for women. And at the same time, the left eyelids of the Rakshasa king also throbbed, and that for him was an evil sign. When Sugriva heard the story of the calamity that had befallen the Raghu princes at Puchavati and how Rama's heart was breaking with the ache of separation from Sita and anxiety as to her fate, and deeply touched, Sugriva tries to console Rama. Rama is still in a state. I have heard everything from Lakshmana, Rama says. I have heard all the words of comfort and solace. But lay aside all doubts and fears. We shall surely discover Sita, wherever she may be concealed, and that soon. Bereavement is a very hard thing, even though Sita is not dead. Even so, any disappointment in life is equivalent to a bereavement. The great medical doctor who studied the science, if you will, of bereavement and the conditions that people go through and have to go through, the late Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, writes many books on this bereavement. And we have to go through many stages. First, I can't believe it happened to me. That's the first thing, denial. And the next thing might be blaming. The next thing might be guilt, self-guilt, self-blaming. And then we might find this anger and disappointment until ultimately, when all things are accepted, full acceptance, and we move on. But occasionally, of course, it comes up again. And Rama is going through a kind of bereavement. He's grieving over the loss of Sita. It's very interesting to see that all the scriptures are to do with essentially two things: immortality and grief. Or you might put it the other way, mortality and grief, and immortality and joy. But this is not a linear progression towards something. There are trends upwards, no doubt, but life is such that there are peaks and hollows, and we have to accept them with forbearance. Anyway, my companions and myself noticed a Rakshasa carrying a weeping lady and speeding fast across the sky. And she was crying, "O Rama, O Lakshmana." This is what Sugriva has noticed. And this gives hope. She too noticed us. And down below, and removing her sash, tied up some jewels in it and threw down the little bundle. Anyway, we've picked this up and we've kept it. And I want you to see if these jewels belong to Sita. For us, it was a woman being carried. Can you verify it? And this is one of the most hopeful signs that Rama has now. And hearing this, Rama excitedly shouts, "Fetch the bundle, please fetch it." And so they brought it from the cave, and when Rama saw the sash, he was beside himself with grief. The little bundle brought before his eyes the suffering that Sita must be going through at the hands of this Rakshasa. He closes his eyes and tells Lakshmana to untie the bundle and examine the jewels, because he himself cannot bear to do it. And Lakshmana does it. Indeed, he says, these are Sita's anklets. There's no doubt they are hers. And these I know, for often I have seen them. I've seen them while laying my head on her feet in worship. And I've seen these ankles as I walked from behind. And so, Lakshmana never looked up, he always looked down. Know that these belong to her. How full of loving reverence is the speech which Valmiki puts in this Ramayana. He puts in the mouth of Lakshmana. And how cruelly must Sita's unjust words have pierced his heart on the fateful day when she drove him from her, because she accused him, if you remember, of wanting her. And he never looked on her face. He always looked down at her feet. Anyway, Rama took all the jewels in his hands and pressed them one by one to his eyes. And he said, "They must have fallen on soft grass, so they're still not broken." But then, you see, grief, as we know, gave place to rage. And then he says, "See, Yama's gates are wide open to receive the Rakshasa." You have to explain Yama. Yama, of course, is the deity that controls death. Is seen to be that aspect which controls death in a mythological way of looking at things. When Yama's gates are wide open, soon him and all his people will be destroyed. Now the hero, the courage starts rising up in Rama. And seeing Rama's grief and his wrath, Sugriva becomes somewhat anxious. Though their mutual friendship, which has now developed, has helped a pledge in the presence of the sacred fire, Sugriva was concerned of the question of priorities. Is Rama's priority now to go and get Sita, or is it to restore Sugriva to the kingdom? You said you'd help me. And Sugriva's heart went to Rama in his suffering, there's no doubt. He himself knew what it was to lose kingdom and his own wife. But then the first things must come first. He must approach the subject guardedly, diplomatically, and not seem to place his own affairs before Rama's. Is a sign of potentially a good king. Because the whole thing might jeopardize their newborn friendship. But it wasn't, of course, purely selfish to say that he, as king of Kishkinda and lord of his tribe, would be a far more serviceable ally than he could be as a fugitive pretender. That's the other side of it. And besides, if we launched on the enterprise of reclaiming Sita when Vali was still king of the Vanaras, the tribe, one could not guess what Vali's course might be. There could be no doubt that the first move in the enterprise must be to secure the resources of the Vanara kingdom. First of all, Vali has to be dealt with. Vali has to be dispatched, and placing himself on the throne, that has to be done. This alone would bring success to Rama, as well as himself, because they can make an alliance. But realizing Rama's state of mind, he resolved to act with a little bit of circumspection. See, in moments of grief, we all have to be delicate. We have to handle people delicately. In many people who haven't been through a bereavement experience or grief in this way, don't really know what to say to somebody who is going through it. Sugriva has gone through it himself. And so he is full of empathy. And sometimes we avoid people, at funerals, for example, or people who have had what they call a loss. And that doesn't help either. But those people who've been through it have the full empathy. They know what to say. So this is a delicate situation because not only are you handling the emotion of grief, but you're also handling a diplomatic situation where there's a win-win situation for Sugriva and for Rama. An alliance has to be formed. So he says, look, I don't know the strength of where the Rakshasa is. I don't know anything about it. What we do know is, we do know where he's taken Sita. And we do know where he keeps her hidden. But still, I promise you solemnly, wherever Sita may be, I shall find her and her captor, and find ways of destroying him and recovering her. You will kill the wicked Rakshasa and win glory. Don't despair or yield to grief. Grief weakens the spirit. Now we can't say to a grieving person, don't grieve. We'll say, grieve a little, but recover. Don't yield to it. Don't fully submit to it. Look at me, says Sugriva. Like you, I have lost my wife. I have been turned out of my own kingdom and disgraced. And yet, I can control my sorrow. I can keep my courage up. And if I, just a Vanara, a mere member of this tribe, a monkey tribe, can do this, it should be far easier for you. If sorrow overwhelms one overwhelms, then you become helpless. You can do nothing. And therefore, he says, friend, he's talking to Rama, I beg of you, control your grief. Now, these words of Sugriva made an impression on Rama's heart, and it worked. And he wiped his tears off his eyes, and he embraced Sugriva. He got over the weakness that possessed him at the sight of Sita's jewels. He recovered his fortitude, his manliness, his self-control. He became the glorious Rama again. And Sugriva, he says, your friendship is dear to me. I shall follow your advice. Think out when and how we should begin the search for Sita. I shall make your cause mine and place you on the throne of Kishinda. And I who say this have never uttered a vain or a false word. Never in my life, and I never will. You can absolutely be certain of my promise. Tell me frankly how I can bring you relief. Let's make a plan. Sugriva and his ministers were overjoyed to hear Rama's words. They were convinced that soon their troubles would end, and Sugriva would once again become king of the Vanaras. And so Sugriva's doubts get cleared, and Sugriva was keen on regaining his kingdom and his family, but he couldn't see how this was going to happen. And Vali's strength stood as an impossible barrier between him and the fulfillment of his desire. Now, Hanuman, his minister, he tries to convince him that it would all be successful with Rama's help, but Sugriva still had some doubts. And so could Rama's strength really overcome Vali's? He's seen Vali in his most impetuous. He's fierce. It all looked hopelessly impossible. Vali's body was like steel. How was Rama going to kill him? Sugriva had these doubts about Rama, but he had none else to help him. And so he wasn't prepared to give up his desire. He decided to test Rama's strength. Now, how is one to subject a friend to a test is an interesting question, without being discourteous, without betraying your own doubts or your suspicions. Ram had promised to get the thing done, there's no doubt, and how was an occasion to be created just to measure his ability. And Sugriva thought very long and hard and formulated a plan. So he tells Rama softly, "My Lord Rama, your words have banished my sorrow from my heart. I know your valor. An arrow from your bow can destroy the 3 worlds. This is not just flattery, of course. How can Vali's frame stand against it? Still, it's my duty to tell you all about Vali's strength. You need to know what you're up against. He can go round to the 4 oceans to take up in his palm and sip the water with the morning prayers. He can toss and play with a heavy rock as if it were a ball. He can pull out mighty forest trees as if they were blades of grass. And once Dundubi, an asura in buffalo form possessing the strength of 1,000 elephants, challenged ocean to a fight. And the ocean evaded, saying, 'You should fight with an equal.' There in the north stands Himavan. Go and challenge him. Leave poor me alone." And Dundubi agreed, and speeding northwards challenged Himavan, going to his rocky side with his horns. And Himavan controlled his temper and said, "Why do you assault me? I'm not a fighter. I spend my life in the company of sages who love to stay with me." Dundubi answers, "Well, very well then, but tell me of someone I can fight with. I want a worthy foe today." And Himavan says, there is one in the south who is worthy of fighting. He is Vali, the Vanara king. His strength is like his father Indra's. If you care, you may go to him and challenge him to fight. And so Dundubi goes straight to Vali's place and raises a loud uproar at the entrance of Kishkinda. And he tears up trees and pulls down the gate and roars, "Come out and prove your strength in a fight with me." And Vali was then resting with his queen, and hearing the challenge, he comes, accompanied by the women of his palace. "Why, O Dundubi, do you raise all this noise and at my city's gate? Are you tired of life?" And Vali's scornful address enrages the Asura, and he says, "Don't boast of your strength in the presence of your admiring women. I have come here for a fight with you. And if you have any madness in you, then you will come out. You will say you are too drunk now to fight, but I am willing to wait till you become sober. If you have any madness, come out and show it." And if you like, you may spend the night in your pleasures, if you like, and bid a tearful leave of all your dear ones, and come to me in the morning to be slain by me. This is the challenge. Now, of course, Vali laughs at Dundubi's words and says, my dear women, go inside, O Ashra, I am not the worst for drink. And if you want to fight, there's no time like the present. So, saying with a laugh, he takes hold of the Ashra by his tail and whirls him round and flings him, and Dundubi spits blood and falls on the ground. And after a while, the Ashra rose again, and a great battle follows. And Vali, son of Indra, pounded the Ashra to death, and he flung the dead buffalo so that it fell on the ground at the distance of a yojana, a certain measured distance. And the drops of blood from the Ashra's body was carried by the wind and fell on the Ashra of Matanga. And the sage was wroth and soon found out who was responsible for this contamination. He sees at once that Vali, in his pride, has flung a bleeding carcass and desecrated the holy spot. And so the Rishi, the sage, pronounces a curse. If this Vali enters the precincts of this ashram, he will lose his life. This is why Sugriva is safe in his hiding at the moment. And that is why Rama, with my friends, I'm living here in safety. Because Vali dares not approach this place for fear of the curse. Look at these sal trees. He can pluck one of them and just shake all the leaves. He can do it like dusting dust off a jacket. Such is his strength. And how could I, having incurred this terrible brother's enmity, feel secured? He gives this background. Don't underestimate Vali. He's very powerful. No doubt you're a hero and all the rest of it, but I'm just telling you. Now, it's interesting that Vali is described as the son of Indra. Indra, of course, was the main deity in many of the Vedas. Indra, of course, represents that force which provides the highest and best benefit for all mankind. Therefore, responsible for rain. Now, there was a drought at one point. Indra became great because he managed to dispatch the one withdrew the rain, and so there was a shift in the kingship of the gods. This is another story. We won't go into it today, but just to let you know that it's very powerful. If Vali is the son of Indra, it's very powerful. Anyway, Lakshmana really had an insight into this, and he understands that Sugriva needs a demonstration of Rama's prowess just to give him the confidence that he can defeat Vali. And he says, how would you like Rama to show you his confidence in conquering Vali? And Sugriva answers, well, indeed, I have no doubts. I know Rama's prowess, though now it is hidden as embers in ashes. I have sought refuge under him, and yet, when I recall Vali's mighty deeds, I tremble. That's all I'm saying. But seeing Sugriva's faith in him and his great fear of Vali, Rama resolves to put an end to his doubts. And so by a playful flip of his toe, he sends the enormous skeleton of Dundubi, which was just lying there, still, flying in the air to a distance of 10 yojanas. But Sugriva wasn't impressed, wasn't convinced. Now, when my brother sent Dundubi's carcass hurling in the sky, it was full of flesh and blood and far heavier than the weather-beaten skeleton, he said. Because he did this originally, way back. He's familiar with this. And then Rama bends his bow and pulls the string to his ear and sends an arrow forth. and it pierces the sal tree pointed out by Sugriva and 6 other trees standing behind it. And piercing the 7 trees, the beautiful arrow touches the earth and then returns to Rama's quiver. Now, we may wonder, how is all this possible if this is a historical account? But you see, the original historical account gets embellished over the years. And really, Rama's divine prowess, surely this is possible. If Rama is a divine incarnation, can he not do anything? But really, the real powers are in the mantras, in the thoughts which go out. And all of these great weapons are powered by the mantras. Anyway, Sugriva, seeing this display of archery, he was, of course, beside himself with joy. And he was now very certain, all his doubt had gone, that Rama's arrow could pierce the adamant frame of Vali. And he falls prostrate before Rama and says, well, with my own eyes, I've now seen your great power. And even if all the gods with Indra and their head should come and oppose you, your victory is certain. So why then talk of Vali? I have gained your friendship. I have no more use for fear, and I have no more use for grief. Slay Vali and save me. And with these words, he says, let us now go to Kishkinda today. This is a wonderful thing. In life, some fearful situation approaches us. We should overcome all these initial impulses of grief and fear and walk towards the problem, seeing only that there is one unity there. Playing the game, playing this drama. This is a drama that we are reading. And when we do that, what will happen? We'll overcome not only our fear, but we'll overcome the object of our fear also, is the idea. So both Rama and Lakshmana agree that they will go to Kishkinda, and they talked to how to set about. And then it was finally agreed that Sugriva should appear in Kishkinda and make a challenge. And Vali, he would be aroused by this, and he would challenge him to single combat. And Vali was sure to come out. He won't bring an army, you see. If you challenge somebody to single combat, that person is bound to take it up. A bit like the Wild West, you challenge somebody to a gunfight, nobody else will get involved. And it reminds me of Goliath and David. Nobody on the Israelite side would challenge their selected person. Come and fight. They selected a huge giant, Goliath. But you see, he was defeated through subtlety. And David and bravery. David was just a shepherd boy with no warrior even brave enough to go and fight. He does it with his small slingshot. So Vali, of course, was sure to come out. And as the brothers were then fighting, Rama would kill Vali with an arrow from the side. They proceed to Kishkinda as planned, and Sugriva goes ahead and Rama follows him and stood away behind a tree in the dense forest. Then Sugriva shouts, "Hey, Vali!" And Vali heard the shout and in great rage, now this is very impulsive, emerges from the fortress, radiant like the morning sun, confident, no doubt, and the two brothers fight each other fiercely. But now Rama was standing, a bow in hand behind a tree, was puzzled. Which one is Vali, which one is Sugriva? They both look the same. And as they wrestled together, the brothers were so similar in form and feature, in equipment and method of fighting, that Rama couldn't distinguish Vali from Sugriva, and he was afraid to shoot the wrong person. And so in the meantime, Sugriva was having the worst of the fight. and broke from his brother's grip with a desperate effort, and wounded and weary, he was disappointed and despondent. What happened? And he runs away and reaches Rishyamukha forest. But even this he wasn't able to do because, of course, Vali didn't wish to slay him, wasn't unwilling to give his brother another lease, and he was not unwilling to give his brother another lease of life. And Rama and Lakshmana rejoined the poor Sugriva. He looked down at the ground without lifting his eyes and naturally was angry with Rama. You said you'd shoot your arrow. You've broken your word. You failed to help me. Now see what happened. Well, if you didn't like to kill Vali, said Sugriva, you could have told me so earlier. In that case, I, who know Vali's might, would never have challenged him to a fight. I'm wounded in ego and wounded in physically too. And so you might, on the contrary, you made me believe you. And I've had such a drubbing that it's a wonder I'm still alive. Don't be angry, Sugriva. But listen, said Rama, I couldn't see who was who. There was a good reason. I couldn't send a deadly arrow and by mistake hit you instead. You and Vali were so alike. You're the same height. You're the same width, same girth. The way you walk. Your shouts are the same. Your voice is the same. Your dress is the same. Or your ornaments are the same. And once the fight began, well, I couldn't tell you from Vali. So I stood bewildered and I was helpless. It would have been terrible if I killed you instead of Vali. Don't you agree? So don't be angry. Challenge Vali once again, but this time I shall surely slay him. Here, Lakshmana, fetch that flowering creeper and tie it round Sugriva's neck as a garland, and then I shall then know who is our friend and who is Vali as they fight. And now, Sugriva, you shall see Vali rolling on the ground. And so Sugriva was satisfied, his spirits recovered, he understood. Lakshmana tied the creeper around his neck, and once again, and more handsome than he was before, Sugriva proceeded to Kishkinda, and Rama and Lakshmana follow him as before. And evening was approaching, and once more Sugriva roared at the gate of Kishkinda and challenged Vali to fight. Vali was then resting happily, was startled for a moment, and very puzzled, but was presently overwhelmed with rage and sprung stamping the earth as though he would split it. You can see his nature, reference to his drunkenness, reference to his fondness of women, and also his impulsive nature. Now Tara, his queen, her heart was full of loving fear, held him in his arms, in a close embrace, and she tried to restrain this impetuosity. And she tried to do it with affectionate counsel. Put away this anger, my dear Lord, as one who puts away just a used garland of flowers or something. For you have had enough fighting today. Leave it. Tomorrow, well, you could do well for another battle. You'll be refreshed. For you don't lack any enemies. There'll be plenty of people to fight if you want. I pray that you don't rush out on the instant. It seems to me that you should think more calmly before going out now to meet your brother. Rest a little. Tomorrow's another day. I'm afraid there's a deep game going on. Your brother was defeated and disgraced and ran for his dear life and hid himself for safety. But now he's returned and he's making another noise. Your brother is not such a fool as to challenge you again so soon after the punishment you inflicted on him, unless He was assured of some other help, some other protection from an invincible ally of tried prowess. Did you observe that his very roar of challenge has a new note of confidence? I should tell you what I heard from Angada, who had it from our scouts and who ranged the forests. Two princes of unrivaled valor, Ram and Lakshmana, have come from Ayodhya, and Sugriva has secured the promise of their assistance. And after all, my lord, your brother is virtuous and brave. Why should you hate him? Who in the world is closer to us than he? Who in the world is closer? And he will be your devoted servant. You just bring him in. He can be your strong ally. Change your course. It's best to forget the past and make it up with Sugriva. My dear Lord, listen to my words. Yashtafakra Gita gives some good advice very early on. It says, in answer to a question, how do I get freedom? The answer is, well, detach yourself from all the objects. Detach your mind from it. Put a different value on them. Secondly, forgiveness. Forgiveness, compassion is mentioned, simplicity is mentioned, but forgiveness is there. It's our greatest virtue we can think of. So in addition to this detachment, it would be this forgiveness. It would be simplicity, it would be compassion, it would be contentment, which is equivalent to thankfulness. And it is commitment to the ultimate truth. Anyway, Vali was disinclined to listen, and he disliked this advice, and anger clouded his intellect, as it does for all of us, and he catches and drags the noose of death. He couldn't see reason, and only became more fixed in his resolve. And Tara, bright and beautiful as became her name, Tara meaning star, of course, her words were in vain. What are you saying? He said. Am I to hear this in silence, the ringing challenge of the enemy brother, when a foe calls to battle, is a warrior to just hang back and ignore it? Death would be better than such cowardice. Don't you worry about Rama. He knows dharma. He is one who knows righteousness. He is one brought up in the fear of sin. Oh, let me alone. I may tell you I shall not kill Sugriva. Only I'll teach him, the presumptuous fellow, a great lesson he will never forget, and let him go. Let me go, I tell you. You have spoken out of the fullness of your love for me, I'm sure, but I shall humble Sugriva once and for all, and send him back and return soon with victory. Don't have any fear over me. And so Valmiki pictures in his story Vali, his chivalry, his dauntless and patient valor, his tenderness, a mix of human qualities. And it's true that Valmiki's hero has to kill this Vanara king because the story requires it. But the slain warrior was a noble knight, actually, despite all these other things that I mentioned. Again, you see, there's no such thing as thorough wickedness. And so he is actually worthy of the reader's admiration and also his tears at this point, because he's not there to slay his brother. He's there just to exert control. And Tara, of course, with tears in her eyes, another personality introduced into the story. She goes round him, praying for his success, and Rin returns to her apartment, full of grave apprehension. And leaving Tara and her companions behind, Vali issues from the fort, hissing like an angry cobra, and he wants to meet Sugriva. And as he sees him standing there, radiant and courageous, he girt his loins and sprang on him. And Sugriva, too, runs forward to meet Vali. If you love your life, warns Vali, run away. Don't fall a victim to this fist of mine. There's an element of compassion going on. And Sugriva retorts angrily, and the battle begins. And fierce, he was fierce. Fierce with remembered wrongs and keyed up above himself by the certainty of Rama's help, Sugriva maintains for a long and equal fight. But presently, Vali's greater might begins to prevail, and Sugriva was in such an obvious distress that Rama, who was watching with his bow ready, knew he couldn't hold out much longer. And so, it was now or never. And placing a deadly arrow on the string, pulling it to the ear, Rama dispatched the arrow. It sped at Vali's mighty chest. Pierced by that irresistible shaft, Vali immediately crashed to the floor. A great forest tree cut asunder by the woodman's axe, like a great tree cut by a woodman's axe, and he lay stretched on the ground, empurpled with blood, as lies the festival flagstaff pulled down when the festival is ended. Now even so, he was radiantly handsome, his noble figure shining like a cloud lit up by the setting sun, and the divine necklace given to him by Indra shone on his breast, which guarded his life and his fortune. And this jewel, Rama's dart, the bleeding wound, all added luster to his mighty body. How Valmiki describes this. And Valmiki's beautiful description, his majestic appearance of the fallen hero, a true warrior, is never so beautiful as when he lies dying on the battlefield. Now astounded at being hit and laid low, when he least expected it from an unknown quarter, Vali looks around in perplexed surprise and sees Rama and Lakshmana approaching him with bow in hand. Now this is a very controversial scene. See, with tears of indignant anger and in a voice faint with approaching dissolution, death, he accuses these two of an ignoble act in dealing causeless death to a person engaged in combat with another. It's not according to the rules. Rama, he said, you are the son of Emperor Dasaratha, born of a noble race and famous by your own exploits. How did you bring yourself to do this? The world is full of praises for your valor and virtue, and yet, while I was absorbed in battle and winning with another, you came hidden, unseen, from behind, and shot a fatal arrow at me. How false and undeserved is your reputation for manly virtue, for truth and forbearance. What will the world think of you now? What harm have I even done to you? Did I come out to fight with you? You have killed me like an assassin, concealing yourself behind the trees. For a royal prince to kill an innocent person in this way is a grievous sin. You are unworthy for kingship. The goddess Earth will never consent to take you for a bridegroom. These were the words he says. My greatest sorrow is that I am killed by a base and sinful wretch. If it was battle with me you wanted, I would have given it to you. You could have slain me in a fair combat. You might have been lying in the dust as I do now. Or if it was of help to recover your Sita, I would have won her back for you in a day. I would have killed Ravana and dragged his body with a rope around the neck and placed it at your feet. No matter where he has hidden Sita, I would have discovered her and restored her to you. All who are born must die. This is the law. I don't therefore grieve for my death. What a heroic statement. Still your sin is great in killing me in this treacherous way. And so Vali, who is the son of Indra, reproaches Rama with his dying breath. And all this is fully set out by Valmiki and by this divine poet Valmiki, as well as by others. And against this accusation, we wonder, what defense could Rama offer? And this is the question that I will leave you pondering. Now, Valmiki has it, of course, that Rama gave some explanation with which Vali was satisfied, but we can omit this as pointless and pray that the learned may, we may learn and we may understand what was behind this. You see, if Rama is an avatar, a divine incarnation, and that among the sorrows that the Lord and his consort had to endure in their earthly incarnations, this liability to have their actions weighed on the earthly scales is a part. Vali, bruised and bleeding from the many wounds of his fight with Sugriva, lay in the throes of death. He lived just long enough to see his queen and his beloved son Angada. The poor bewildered lad who at his mother's bidding to fall at the feet of his father, who was going on a long, long journey, prostrated himself in silence, too stunned to realize the extent of his loss. And of course, this is narrated later, but Vali's words were addressed to Rama. So we leave this off, we haven't finished this, and we leave you to puzzle and meditate on the validity of this scene and how it assists the overall mission, if you will, that Rama has. Of course, birth, life, and death happen every day. Even as I talk, these events are happening. We're all alive, no doubt, but every second some child is born in the world, adding to the 8 billion people on the planet. But equally, some are dying. Some are dying in difficult circumstances. Some are dying out of natural causes. But we will all do this at some point. Now, if we take the philosophical position, we'll understand that death is merely closing the eyes. What we call sleep, what we call dream, is, according to Katha Upanishad, simply the rising and setting of the senses. The rising and setting of the senses, yes. The external senses give rise to the external world, but as soon as we close our eyes and our ears and all the senses, the inner senses are operating, and we hardly notice. And when these set, then a peace descends. And this is close to our inner nature, not fully recognized as our area of creative potential. So, in all these stories, what does death mean? It is not as a difficult issue, and yet we have to bear sorrows in life itself. And we can see all the emotions brought out, all the emotions, we might say, of humanity brought out in this great story. I look forward to continuing with this next week. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.